Good morning, Skallywags, and welcome back to a series of enigmatic events. I'm Shpoo.
I'm AJ.
And in case you missed our last couple of episodes, this is part 3 in a 4-part miniseries discussing a few different unidentified bodies found over in Norway, and what might tie them together.
If you missed parts 1 and 2, we talked about the Isdal Woman and the Oslo Woman. Be sure to go back and watch those, as this one we feel connects to them, and we will bring it all together in part 4. With that being said, today we bring you the Kambo Man.
So as we previously mentioned in the last couple of episodes, there are a total of 15 unsolved, unidentified body cases in Norway. That's not like this year or whatever. That's 15 total. And of course, this is the third one we're discussing out of literally 1/5 of Norway's unidentified cold cases.
All 3 victims have remained unidentified. All of the tags was removed from their clothes, any personal items that were found with them.
All 3 of them are also believed to be, or at least claimed to be, or thought to be from Belgium or someplace right there near Belgium. All 3 died under very mysterious circumstances, and all 3 deaths were ruled as suicides, even though pretty much all of the evidence would strongly suggest otherwise.
And all 3 have a connection to a plot that we think could date back all the way to World War II.
So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deep and take a look at the third case in this little mini-series, the Kambo Man. The Kambo Man can. I couldn't help myself. That's been stuck in my head since I started researching this thing. So at around 8 a.m. on September 22nd, 1987, locomotive Sven Ivar Johannesson and conductor Roger Assurd were rolling into a train station in Moss, Norway. They were actually on their way to Oslo. Suddenly, they get a message from a train that's heading in the opposite direction, telling them, basically, heads up, there's something on the tracks ahead over by Kambo Mill. So Sven Ivar, he hits the brakes and slows way down, kind of progressive, very cautiously. Cautiously. I don't know what that would turn into Sean Connery all of a sudden. Progresses very cautiously up the tracks, and suddenly he sees, whatever it is laying there, right there on the tracks. He is quoted as saying, "Then I see that there is a case in the railroad. At first I thought it was a garbage bag, but as I get closer, I see that it is human."
Obviously shocked, he jumps from the train, goes to investigate the body in the track. He noted that the body looked to be 50 to 60 years old, lying on his stomach on the left side of the track, with his right foot and his right arm cut off from his body. It looked to be like he got hit by a train.
That's what happens when you get hit by a train, by the way, in case you didn't know. Sven Ivar stated that the clothes that the man was wearing was very ordinary, which this automatically sets the Kambo Man apart from the other 2, the Oslo and the Isdal Woman. Both were said to wear very fancy clothes all the time. This guy, very ordinary. Said there was absolutely nothing striking about him whatsoever. They found him wearing the following: a gray blouse jacket or military jacket, a pair of blue jean trousers, a white shirt with dark thin stripes, 2 medical support socks with blue stripes at the top with an open toe, a yellow machine knit sweater with a square pattern on it, a white undershirt, a pair of Elan body underwear, a handkerchief with brown stripes and a square pattern, a black belt made of artificial leather. He had a red Victorinox Swiss Army pocket knife with the model Climber written on it, and a soft pack of Camel cigarettes produced in the West for distribution in Eastern Europe. So, obviously, not only is it unusual to find a man just laying out in the middle of the tracks, but what makes it even weirder is where he was laying. This area that he was found in, completely difficult to gain access to. Basically, on one side you've got the sea, and on the other side you've got a very steep slope that leads down into a very dense forest. So this guy's out in the middle of absolute nowhere.
Who was this man? Why was he out in the middle of nowhere? And on foot, no less.
So Sven Ivar, he pops the train around. He goes back to the Kambo station to call the police. They had to stop all the train traffic in the entire area, and until investigator, a man named Helge Jodelin.
Again, we'll put the name
right. I'm terrible with names. I try my best. But he finally arrives by train from Moss just under an hour later, around 8:50.
So they found this body. He didn't have any ID, but like we said before, all the tags were removed from all of his clothing except for his underwear, which I believe was probably like a...
Printed around the band.
I just picture like Michael J. Fox from like Back to the Future, Calvin Klein.
It's written all over your underwear.
They were not just removed, but they say they were purposely removed.
Right.
Like they were like cut out on purpose.
Yeah, just like the other two, that's one of the many things that kind of ties these three cases together. And again, we'll get into all of those details in the next episode. So in his pockets, they find the Swiss Army knife and the pack of cigarettes. And other than the fact that the cigarettes were believed to have been made in the West for purposes of selling in Eastern Europe specifically, other than that, there was nothing to indicate where he was from, or more specifically, who he was.
Just like the other two cases we've talked about, this one was deemed a suicide at the scene. Apparently in the 1980s, suicide by train in Norway was a big thing.
Usually the difference between this one and those, however, is when a person commits suicide by train, typically they'll just jump off the platform right there at the station. This guy, like we said, was out in the middle of no man's land. To paint this picture a little more clearly, he was literally miles away from the nearest station. So when we say that he's out in the middle of nowhere, he's literally in the middle of nowhere. So they pick the Kambo Man up, they get him back to the station, and they load him into a car. And from there, they take his body to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Oslo for an autopsy.
The autopsy showed that he was, 1, in good health. He didn't have any alcohol in his system, and there was no evidence of any prior alcohol abuse.
They did find, of course, obviously, multiple injuries that, go hand in hand with being hit by a train. He had crushing injuries to his skull. He had scrapes on his back. Of course, his right arm and foot had been cut off. And he was also bleeding from the eyelids, which is creepy. Had immense blood loss from the limbs being cut off. And in summary, it was found that the man was not dead until he was overrun by the train, and that there was little to no evidence of foul play of any kind.
As far as any evidence to help figure out who this man was, they did find a couple things. They found that he probably had an upper denture, but it wasn't found on the scene. He had 2 scars that they think were from a hernia surgery, but none of those actually helped figure out who he was. Right. They were very generic kind of things.
Now, unlike the Isdal and Oslo Woman, we don't have as clear of a picture as far as a country of origin for the Kambo Man, where we know that the Isdal Woman and the Oslo Woman either were from Belgium or at least somewhere nearby Belgium.
They both claim to be.
Right. The Kambo Man, they don't think that he was, the only thing that they really came up with, his DNA profile does paint him as being somewhere in the general European vicinity, or possibly Colombia.
They're very different things for some.
Wide spectrum there. But they don't believe that he's Norwegian because, and I absolutely love this, because if he was Norwegian, someone would have reported him missing by now.
Well, considering they only have 15 unidentified bodies
Good point. Yeah.
It's a point. It's a point. Yeah.
Which jumping subjects here brings us to his belongings. So we mentioned that he had the pack of Camels in his pocket, and there were about 5 cigarettes left on those. And again, we keep saying that they were made in the West, specifically to be sold in Eastern Europe. And how they determined that was that the quality of the tobacco was not as good as, I guess, the quality that's found in Western cigarettes.
Who knew?
So they're kind of sold to smaller areas and that type of thing over in Eastern Europe. Now, investigators also said that there should be a label on the cigarettes that shows where they were manufactured, but that label had also been torn off, much like the others. So, in conclusion, basically, everything points to Eastern Europe.
Eventually, the case was sent to the ID Commission of Criminal Police Center, and a black notice was sent to Interpol. If you don't know what a black notice is, it's kind of like a dossier of the evidence with photos, weight, height, any identification, like identifying things. And it was sent out to Interpol, which is throughout Europe. The problem is there was no hit.
And the problem is it was Interpol. They don't have a great track record. I'm sorry.
None of the countries within that Interpol had any missing people that matched his description or anything. So
the ID Commission, they basically decided to go to the the 4chan or Reddit of the 1980s, aka the media, and surprisingly, it actually turned up quite a bit. Until it didn't, because there was a lot of tips that came in from the public, and many of those tips actually proved to be quite helpful, and until they didn't. I mean, they're like, oh, that's a great lead, and then it just completely fell flat, unfortunately, and that happened multiple times.
One of the tips said that the Kambo Man resembled a Nazi soldier who had been stationed in Norway during World War II. The resemblance was there, but this was actually like 40 years later, and as with all the other tips, that kind of fell through.
Now, unfortunately, the research didn't really specify how that one fell through, but there were plenty more where that came from.
It's 40 years later.
Right. Another tip, and this is probably my favorite one, it says that he looked like a guy that was on a coupon sheet. And in case you don't know, a coupon sheet is a sheet of coupons that you would then cut out and use. But yes, these ads that the coupons came from, they had a man on them. And granted, the guy was pretty similar. Yeah, they definitely there. But in fact, the guy, I love this quote. The guy who gave this tip said that the man depicted in this ad is scary to the dead.
Scary?
What the hell does that mean? Maybe they didn't think he was that attractive. I don't know. Ultimately, the man in the ad, he had a mole next to his eye. The Kambo Man did have a mole on his face as well, but it was in a completely different spot, so they ruled that one out as well. But in my own opinion, it's nice to know that the 1980s precursor to, YouTube comments or Dr. Facebook, still in effect here. So not much has changed. It's comforting.
It's like, there's a bald man. It must be Shrew.
No, obviously. Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much what it boils down to anyway. Oh, they both have feet. It must be him. Actually, I guess the Kambo Man doesn't really have feet anymore, but... That's terrible. Sadly, still unidentified, in the winter of 1988, the Kambo Man was laid to rest in a small cemetery where investigator Yodelin said that it was him. He's buried here as NN, and there's no headstone.
Do we know why NN?
I'm not sure what that exactly stands for. Maybe
I didn't research that. I don't know.
I'm not sure. It could be a Norwegian thing. I'm not sure. Norwegian nameless.
There we go. We just did that.
Just a guess, although I'm sure it wouldn't be in English, so there's that. But he says he remembers that it was just the priest, the church, and myself were the only ones that were there. That's the investigator Yodelin that said that.
That's very sad, actually.
Yeah, there's no headstone, there's no marker of any kind, just a little spot, general area where Yodelin says that the Kambo Man is now buried in this little cemetery, and that's not only sad, it's just unfortunate. I mean, truly unfortunate.
With new advances in DNA since the 1980s, of course, you could think we could get some DNA, but most of the clothes and articles were washed or discarded or lost completely. We may never know who the Kambo Man was based on a DNA profile.
Right.
But we do have some theories of who he may have been.
Yeah. Unlike the first two cases, we actually do have a few theories to play off of on this one, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
The info about the case itself is much shorter, but we do have several different theories here. The first one is that he may have been a sailor. There's actually a new investigator that's working the case now. Obviously, Yodelin, that was 1987. So he's not retired by now.
Hopefully just retired.
So this new investigator, he's been looking at the case, and he got the idea to go and take a look at some of the ships that had kind of come and gone during that time period. Unfortunately, the area doesn't have an archive, but there was an old ship log book that he found that showed that there was a German ship, a cargo ship called the MS Eldegard, that arrived in Moss on September 20th and left again at 10 o'clock on the 22nd, just 2 hours after the Kambo Man's body was found. So it's entirely possible, that he may have been a member of that crew and just wandered off for whatever reason, and maybe that might even explain why he was out in the middle of nowhere taking a shortcut trying to get back to the shipyard. Don't know.
Another interesting theory comes comes from a 70-year-old truck driver. His name is Roy Sandberg. Now, Roy Sandberg was watching TV and he saw a story on the mysterious Kambo Man. And this was more recent in years. I don't know what year it was that he saw this, but it made him remember back to September of 1987. And during September of 1987, he was a long-haul truck driver in Europe, and he was traveling from Italy to Norway. During this trip, somewhere in Germany, he stopped. He noticed that there was a small hole in his the back of his truck.
The tarp that covers the back.
And it was cut into a little triangle about the size of a hand. Roy didn't think too much of this. He thought maybe he hit something and it had torn the tarp or anything like that, and then he just continued on his way to his home. Once Roy got into town near the Kambo Mill, he parked his truck and his wife picked him up.
So from there, the plan was for Roy's wife to pick him up, take him home just a couple of miles away. They'd sleep for the night, what have you, and bring him back to the truck in the morning, and then he would continue on to Oslo, where he was scheduled to unload the truck. After he parked the truck, he kind of gets out and he's checking over everything, make sure everything is secure, and right as he's about to step off the trailer, he hears something. It sounded like, I don't know, like a canister falling over or something along those lines. So he looks down to his wife, he says, did you hear that? And she's like, nope, I didn't hear anything. So he's like, yeah, okay, shrugs it off, jumps off the trailer, and off he goes. Next morning, they come back to the truck to find that the hand-sized hole is now a man-sized hole, which that gets her every time for whatever reason. But man-sized. At first, Roy thinks probably what any of us would think, and think, oh, someone robbed my truck.
Yeah.
It didn't take long, though, for him to realize that was not the case, because, well, first of all, nothing was missing, which is usually a pretty good indicator that you haven't been robbed. Yeah. Secondly, the hole had actually been cut or torn from the inside, leaving the flap and everything kind of hanging outward instead of inward.
So something got out instead of got in.
Yes, like a chest burster from Alien.
I knew he was going to go there. Yeah. Roy stated that he parked the truck near the town of Moss, or at least you could see the lights from the town of Moss from where he parked the truck. So he had a theory that the Kambo Man had been inside of his truck since he left Italy.
It's a long time.
That's a long time. And that when he parked the truck near Kambo Mill, the Kambo Man saw the lights, cut a hole, and decided to walk toward the town. I have a couple of questions about this one.
I've got a problem with that too.
Yeah. Well, my problem with that is, one, he was traveling in the back of the truck for days, all the way from Italy to Norway. And the report mentions that he stopped in Germany. So why would he wait until he got to Kambo Mill in the middle of nowhere to get out of the truck, follow lights to a little town that he probably didn't know what town it was?
I mean, if he's just...
Why then?
Yeah, if he's just looking for a random place to get out. I mean,
Why not get out in Germany?
From Italy all the way through Germany into Norway. Yeah, and you choose here, apparently.
Yeah. So that's a question.
Oddly enough, there's an answer for that. There is a report that a station manager from a nearby station, and I'm not even going to attempt to... Jernbeneverket station, apparently, I guess. Anyway, this station manager, he had reported that there was a freight train on its way to Moss that had actually seen the guy that matches the Kambo Man's description. Had seen him about half an hour before the Kambo Man was killed. What is crazy about this, the train conductor said that he had seen the man standing along the tracks, quote, just standing there. So they actually believe that he saw the lights from the truck, he got out, walked over to the train, and then tried to jump on board the train,
but got hit.
But slipped and fell underneath to his death.
That's a theory.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
There is yet another theory that claims that he is a man named Remy Bouillard. Remy is a 54-year-old man who disappeared without a trace back in 1977.
So 10 years prior.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, exactly 10 years prior. From the village of Rossens in Freiburg. That's a French speaking part of Switzerland. The two men, they've actually got quite a bit of similarities between them. Obviously, there's a 10-year gap in there, and once you hit the 50s and 60s range, you do tend to your face ages up quite a bit. In fact, the lead investigator on the case, he says that the resemblance between the two is absolutely striking. Unfortunately,
there are a lot of missing people in Europe at this time frame, and there's not a lot of places to get information about these missing people.
Right. So the case of Bolyard was actually found on a website called the Doe Network, as in John Doe Network, obviously. Yeah. Investigators at Isdal Norge have actually reached out to the Swedish authorities to try to get any information on Bolyard that they can, but as previously mentioned, when it comes to Interpol or working with other countries and stuff like that over in the area, that could prove to be a little bit of a challenge. The hope is that they'll at least be able to locate some of Bolyard's relatives so that they can at least do a DNA comparison and hope that maybe there's a match. I mean, if so, that would put to bed two very old and very cold cases.
Yeah. And the last theory that we're going to talk about, the one that is similar to the Isdal Woman and the Oslo Woman, and that is that the Kambo Man was a spy. Is that your spy music?
It's James Bond.
I know, but that was quite the head move.
I don't know. I'm weird. Leave me alone.
This, of course, was during the height of the Cold War with Russia, and all of his tags and no ID and all of that lends itself to that theory of him being a spy.
Especially after we talked in the last episode about the retired CIA guy that said that removal of tags, that type of thing, is
standard protocol.
Standard protocol. So yeah, if somebody doesn't want to be identified, remove anything that can be identified.
Why the Cold War spy in this area, Kambo Man? Well, there was a NATO installation in the area, but we'll get into that a lot more.
Just a little taste. That's all coming in part 4.
Part 4.
Yeah, which Thursday, by the way, so stick around for that. And then there's the situation involving the man's shoes.
Oh, his shoes.
The plot thickens. So while the attire that the Kambo Man wore was very ordinary, very unstriking, I think he called it, or something along those lines. In fact, investigators even went as far as to say that they believe he could have gotten his clothes from a homeless shelter or a hostel or a Salvation Army type thrift store or something along those lines. His shoes, however, were a completely different story. His shoes were very, very costly, very sophisticated,
like
high-end shoes. They're a brand called Mephisto, and they're typically recommended for people that have to be out in the field walking long distances or people who have health problems. Now, we mentioned health problems. Obviously, he did have the support socks.
The medical socks.
Yeah, the medical socks. But they say that even with that this just doesn't make sense.
Well, that and the autopsy did say he was in good health. So they didn't find anything in the autopsy that would say that he needed these things.
Why he needed the socks to begin with. And then these shoes specifically, I mean, these they were designed by a man who made them specifically for engineers and architects, people that needed good solid footwear for work out in the field. The scoops
of a work boot?
Not like a work boot. It's basically like when they say out in the field, they mean like an operative out in the field, that type of thing.
Good support.
Yes. Okay. So basically anybody that has to walk long distances, that type of thing, these are shoes specifically built for those types of people.
Gotcha.
The scoops of his shoes were very, very, very worn down. They were pulled down on the outer edges of the soles right at the back of the shoe.
Okay.
But the laces were practically brand new. And while that is odd in and of itself, then they found something on the inside of the shoe. Inside the left shoe, they found a small piece of paper taped to the inside of the shoe. Now, when we say inside of the shoe, it wasn't just like, look inside the shoe, oh, there it is.
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
what I thought.
On the inside, like between the outer layer and the inner layer.
So like
separate those. there's a piece of paper taped inside. And it had the number 15250 written on it.
Oh, God, I want to know what that number means.
I know. We have no idea, neither do they. At first, they thought, well, maybe this had been something that one of the police from the original investigation had written on there, but they ruled that out.
Right.
And
well, because the numbers were really faded, the tape was old.
Yes, it was written under the tape, for one.
And it was inside, like, not just inside the shoe.
On the actual inside of the shoe. Back in the 80s, they pretty much solely focused on the guy's body and not what he was wearing.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, pretty much all of the clothes were either discarded or washed. Could it be some kind of like a secret code number, or could it just be some kind of, I don't know, like an inventory number or something that was left at some point in time?
It is weird as somebody who works, like, I've done fashion shows and stuff, and even when you do that, you don't open the shoe up and put it in there.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that's something that was put in there for a reason.
Yes, it was.
As far as what that reason is, I mean, we will probably never know.
Oh, I want to know.
15250. I mean, that's a zip code? I don't know. I mean, other than that, like,
I have no idea.
It could be anything.
It could be a security pass.
Yeah, it could be literally anything.
So, as I mentioned before, this was early in the DNA process. Like, they didn't do DNA a lot in the 80s.
It was just getting started.
Yeah.
Right.
What I found interesting is what you just brought up was that these clothes were washed or discarded. Now, not everything. Anything that had blood on it that they did keep was washed. So all the blood was washed away. All of this was found in a cardboard box 30 years later. Like, I guess they lost the whole evidence box until 30 years later. But inside that box, they found some stuff.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the items were still there. But like we mentioned, they'd just been simply washed. I mean, bye-bye DNA. We still had the jacket, the sweater, the shirt, one of the 2 support socks, the handkerchief, sleeveless shirt, the Swiss Army knife, the belt, the Mephisto brand shoes, and luckily, we still have the pack of Camel cigarettes with about 5 cigarettes inside.
Is it bad? Can I just say this? Is it bad? I want to know if it's the shoe with the sock with the hole in it.
Right.
Like, they specifically
open
pointed
toe.
out, they were like, socks, one with an open toe. I'm sorry, it's just a me thing.
And then the rest of it had either been kind of just washed or discarded. But having said that, not all has been lost, because they found 30-year-old blood on the corner of the pack of Camel cigarettes and on the shoes. And they have enough blood for a full DNA profile.
Unfortunately, for a DNA profile to work, you have to have a family to match it against, or some kind of bio.
Some kind of base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So perhaps the Bouillard. See, he says it better than me. Perhaps that family, now that they have DNA to match, maybe we can get closure on that. But as for that, nothing remains answered yet.
Yeah.
So
it's a waiting game at this point.
That brings us up to date on our 3 cases. And the question is, what do they have in common? Could they be spies? Is there any weight to that?
Well, as it turns out, yes. As we previously mentioned in the last episode, we first decided to do this when we were watching the Netflix revival of Unsolved Mysteries, and they had their episode on the Oslo Woman. When they first started the episode, I thought, oh, this is about the Isdal Woman.
Yeah.
Well, then they mention a hotel and all this stuff. I'm like, no, that's not Isdal Woman. And she shot herself. No, that's definitely not the Isdal Woman. Wow, this is so similar, though.
Yeah.
And that kind of led us to looking into, are there others that have this weird, mysterious, unknown person died in Norway thing? And that's what led us here. So we started digging. And not only did that digging lead us to the Kambo Man,
Right.
it led us down a rabbit hole so deep that during the course of our research, and let me stress this, accidentally ended up on the websites for NASA, the FBI, the CIA,
The Pentagon.
and the KGB.
All on my phone.
I didn't know that the KGB was a thing anymore, for one. For two, we cannot recreate this. We have tried to go back to find this KGB website again and have been unsuccessful. And what's even scarier is it doesn't show up
On my history.
on the search history at all. Or in the internet history, pages history. It's not there. I'm not sure I want to know why.
But what did we find down this rabbit hole?
Oh God.
Well, to find that out, you'll have to watch
You're
the
gonna
next
have to
episode.
come back Thursday. And to clarify, by the way, we keep saying, this 4-part miniseries and stuff.
Yeah.
We do not mean that a series of enigmatic events is only going to be 4 episodes and then it's gone forever. No, these are just our first 4 episodes.
Yeah.
It's technically our first episode that's being chopped into 4 parts.
It would have been too long.
Yeah, it would have been like a 3-4 hour long video if we would have done this in one big long video, which, okay, great. There's a ton going on here, but nobody wants that. The Spies of Norway specifically.
Yes.
Once that is over with, the show will continue. It will still be on Tuesdays and Thursdays every week, and we will be covering, unsolved crimes, unsolved deaths, unsolved mysteries, cryptids, supernatural, UFO. If it doesn't have an answer, we are going to talk about it at some point. So join us for that.
So until next time, thank you for watching.
Absolutely. Make sure you check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and considering maybe even starting a TikTok. I don't know. I specifically want to start a TikTok for the sole purpose of mocking popular TikTok trends. I don't know. Haven't really made up my mind yet.
But be sure to like, comment, share, and most important, if you like this and you want to continue seeing what we're going to be doing on not just the show, but everything on Skallywag
Monday through
Productions,
Friday.
hit the
subscribe button. How about that?
That was so good.
I know you were right there, just so close. But yes, please, guys, hit that subscribe button, and yeah, let us know what you want to see next on this series of enigmatic events. Thanks for watching.
I was so close. You're gonna keep it in like that, aren't you?
Probably, yeah.